Good Friday morning, jazz band. I am coming to you from Dave Brubeck's band behind me in honor of Dave's 100th birthday, which is this week. And my head is hiding Mr. Brubeck. See if I can figure it out. So he's right up behind me here on the piano. And he's having fun, that signature smile there. This is during the timeout recording of the album Timeout. And in case you are wondering what he looks like now that he is 100, I've got a picture here to share with you. So there he is. Still got the greatest smile, I think. Still just loving it, it seems like. There is a virtual event this week, I think on Sunday, to celebrate his 100th birthday and his contributions to jazz, specifically, of course, West Coast jazz. He was from California area, so he's part of the West Coast jazz um, style. And if you don't know much about it, do a little digging this week. It's a good time to find out something about him. He's a pretty interesting character. So that's our artist of the week, I guess. Not that we really have such a thing, but I just think, especially Take Five, you probably have heard of that one. But the whole album Timeout is pretty amazing and worth a listen to if you have never listened to the whole thing. He plays with time signatures quite a bit, and he says things like 5/4, you can't swing in 5/4, watch me. And it's pretty cool. And I happen to think Paul Desmond here on the alto sax, I love his tone. So anytime I get to be on stage with these guys, it's great. Okay, back to our lesson. We have been doing a series trying to help the new folks kind of get up to speed on how to swing and how to approach making a solo in the blues. And so I'm going to do kind of a amalgamation of both of those concepts today. We talked about how most of what you are expected to do in swing style is not written actually in the music. And I think that stems again from the fact that jazz itself was not written down for many, many years and was just something that you kind of assimilated by hearing it and being around it, much like you would learn how to speak your native language, right? So you just hear it around you and then you start doing it too. And that's kind of what happened with jazz. The problem now is that you guys don't have an opportunity that much, unless you create one, to really hear jazz that much and swing style. So that is why I always say, please listen, go on YouTube, spend some time listening to jazz, because otherwise you will not know how to do this. In the meantime, we're practicing scales, right? And we talked about how to swing last time. And now we're going to take it a little bit further into articulation. So again, this is what's written. It's just a scale. It says swing, and you're supposed to know what to do with that. Many times directors with new groups will say things like accent the and that's kind of right, and it kind of works, but what you end up getting is something that sounds like this, which is neither very correct or very pleasing, but it is a lot how beginning jazz bands sound. So here's one interpretation. So you can hear, hopefully, how that just really doesn't do it, right? It doesn't quite fulfill the requirements of swing, doesn't make you really want to dance. It's not particularly smooth or lending itself to just being super exciting. However, it won't take very long on YouTube to find a junior high band that swings exactly this way. And I think actually the directors are to blame, and myself included in that, because one easy way to kind of get you to start is to say accent the end of the beats. And if you only do that, that is what you get. So number 2 here, we don't really want to sound like that. So let's look at number 3 down here. And this is really how we should think about it. We're aiming for kind of a do tongue or a b sound, not ta or ta or anything very hard or harsh. And what we are going to do is tongue the end, go ahead and tongue it on that soft tongue, but then slur to the beat. So of course you have to start with tonguing, but as you get going with this, it's going to sound more like something like that. And obviously I'm not a scat singer, but you get the idea, I hope, from that. And as you listen and play around with this, it's going to become a little bit clearer to you. The computer doesn't do a stellar job of this, but let's listen to it anyway. So better, right, than example 2 up there, where it was just very disjointed and not very swing-like at all. When you do this do tongue or b tongue, do ba do bo bo bo, you're going to get a slight accent on the end, and that's where that instruction comes from. But it shouldn't really be a harsh, in your face, look at me, I'm an accent type of thing. It's a lot smoother than that. And you can practice this with scales, but in your music, you can find passages that you can work on this style in both C jam blues and in, what's the other one? All right, okay, you win is the other one. And there's lots of phrases that you can practice this tongue style. And I call it swing style, or most of the people I grew up with call it swing tonguing. I've heard it called bebop tonguing, and I have trouble with that because it existed way before bebop did in the timeline of events, and so I don't really understand where that's coming from. Yes, it's used in bebop, but it was also used in blues and swing and all of the things that came before that, so I don't really understand that. Anyway, the terms are used interchangeably. So it really just means this style of kind of soft tonguing, and slurring to the downbeats of things. Okay, so spend some time practicing on that and making sure that you're doing it really slowly at first so that you can really control what your tongue is doing. The other thing I wanted to cover today is not blues tonguing at all, but when we are doing our warm-ups, when we're doing our improv stuff, I will often say, background people, play the roots or play the chords. And I realized for some of you, I haven't really taught you what that means, I don't think, this year. So I want to go over that really fast. Unless you are a pianist or possibly a guitarist or something like that, you cannot play the whole chord at once. You can only play one note at a time on your horns. So you're going to have to break the chord apart. It's called broken chords, and play the tones of the chords, the 1, 3, 5, and the flat 7 in order or in succession of each other. You can't play them all at once like a pianist would. So this is what I mean by this. And I have given it to you in concert B flat. So if you're not a concert instrument, you're going to have to transpose it for your chords. But here's the idea. Okay. So obviously that's not the blues form, but those are the 3 chords you need, and the idea behind when I say play the chords underneath, that's what I mean. When I say play the roots of the chords, I mean these notes, the 1, 4, and the 5 of that key. And then in that case, you would just play that whole note all the way through. Why do I have you do this? 1, because you need to be familiar with the chord structure and how to create a chord. And 2, so that when you are soloing, you have another thing that you can use aside from the blues scale. You know that these 4 notes, anytime you have a 1 chord, these 4 notes will be appropriate. They will sound good. There's no guesswork there. If you play chord tones over the chord, it's going to sound fine. There's not a problem with that. So that's why we do that. It's just another group of notes that are at your disposal then when you're creating your solo. So practice scales with the swing tonguing. Go into your sheet music and find places you can practice that style of tonguing, and also make sure you know the 1, 4, and 5 chord for your instrument in B flat blues. One other thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of putting quotes into your solo. We worked on that a little bit. I just kind of threw it out there yesterday. Quotes are a part of jazz history. It's kind of like giving honor to somebody that has done a solo before you. You take something really well known, such as Jingle Bells, or some other song that most everybody knows. Sea Jam Blues is a quotable song, actually, because it's a standard that people know. So if you are a jazz person, you would choose probably a jazz standard that's gone before you. A Train, or something that people know. In the Mood is another one that gets quoted a lot. It's part of the literature of jazz already. And then you would stick it into your own solo. So there's some problems with quoting that I want to address, especially because you guys are kind of new to this. You cannot simply figure out the song that you want to quote and then just stick it in there with no thought behind it. It sounds really lame when you do that. It would be like if I was telling you a story and in the middle of it talked about something else completely random and then came back to my story. You would be confused, and so are your listeners if you simply just stick it in there. The first rule is your quote needs to be in the same key that you are improvising in. And that seems kind of like a no-brainer, but I cannot even count the number of times people have learned, say, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and say, okay, Mary Had a Little Lamb starts on A. And they go dee 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 dee, and that doesn't work if you're improvising in B flat, because Mary Had a Little Lamb in B flat doesn't start on A. So you need to stay in the same key. I had a teacher once that made me learn Mary Had a Little Lamb in all 12 keys. That was one of my assignments. And his thought process behind that was so that I would understand that you can play a song in any key. I hear people all the time saying, well, this one is in this key. Well, it may be often played in that key, but you can play a song in every key. It really doesn't matter. It has more to do with the range of the instruments or the singers that you are creating right at the moment, and that's what key you play it in. So rule number 1 is put your quote in the key that you're improvising in. Number 2 is don't use them too often. If you put a quote into every solo, it quickly becomes a gimmick or something that just cheapens what you are doing. And instead of giving honor to the jazz masters that came before you, you're kind of cheapening their work by just stealing it and sticking it in instead of doing your own work. And so it kind of becomes the opposite of what you're trying to do. And it's not even funny for a while. It's like, oh yeah, they're doing that again. And people just stop listening. Whereas if you use it sparingly, people go, oh, that was great. I heard A Train in the middle of that. Or, In the Mood, or whatever you quoted. It becomes something really cool instead of something that just goes, oh yeah, they didn't want to create a solo again, so they stole somebody else's. So be very careful. Use it sparingly. That being said, the problem really becomes how to get into and out of a quote correctly. And I think the only way to really be able to do this is to have quite a good grasp on the theory behind what you're doing and make it so that you arrive at the first note of your quote and exit your quote in a logical way. If you were writing a paper, you wouldn't just put your quote marks and stick your quote in there and then go off onto something else, right? If I wanted to quote Dave Brubeck on Time Out, I might say something like, in an interview with Downbeat Magazine, Brubeck said, that's an introduction, you know, Time Out was the greatest achievement of my life, end quote, right? He didn't really say that as far as I know, but that's my example to you guys today. So my point is you have to introduce your quote and get out of your quote in a logical way. You can't just stick it in there and hope for the best, or it becomes something just really random, like that's weird, instead of something that really helps what you're doing. Okay. If you are just starting out in improv, this might be way too far advanced for where you're at, and that's okay. Stick it back in your memory somewhere and play around with it later when you feel more comfortable. I am trying to meet the needs of a vastly different band, and some of you are really good at improv and need some more to do, and some of you are just starting out, and both of those things are pretty awesome. But I'm just trying to give everybody something to work on. So one way to start working on quotes is to just figure out the quote that you want. And it's December, so use Christmas carols if you wish. And first, figure out how to play the Christmas carol and realize that you do not have to play the whole song. If you're going to quote Joy to the World, which is just a scale, so it's a good one to start with. You have Joy to the world, the Lord has come, right? That's just a scale. That's enough for most people to recognize it. So you don't need the whole song in there. Figure that out in the key that you need and how it would work in the chord structure. And then figure out a few notes to lead up into that top note and a few notes to finish it off at the end. You can change a few of the given notes to fit, say, like the blues scale. It's especially effective, I think, at the end. So, joy to the world, the Lord has given, whatever you want to do at the end. Play around with it. Practice, 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 practice. That's why the blues backing tracks on YouTube exist, and that's why they are over an hour long, some of them, because it just takes a while to get used to this. You don't just sit down and do this most of the time. So hopefully that gives you some things to work on. Make sure that you bring your red hats on Thursday so that we can record. You do not have to wear concert dress. But if you have the red hats, let's do that and keep that tradition alive. Until then, I will see you. Keep working on C Jam Blues and All Right, Okay, You Win. And we'll see what we can accomplish by Thursday. Have a great week.